Welcome to Beat Diabetes. I'm Dennis Pollock, and today I'm going to share with you the foods that I've made a vital part of my diet, which have enabled me to beat diabetes and hold it at bay for the last 24 years or so. I'm convinced that a major reason why so many people have been helped through this YouTube channel is that I simply share what has worked for me in keeping my glucose levels close to normal. And lots of people seem to find that the same approach works for them. And usually they start watching other YouTube channels by doctors who think like I do, like the late Dr. Bernstein, like Dr. Jason Fung, Dr. Eric Westman, Dr. Annette Bosworth, Ken Berry, and there are scores of lesser-known doctors that have taken up the concept of lowering carbohydrates in your diet and believing this can save you from a world of health difficulties. Now, I'm not a doctor, but I'm surrounded by lots and lots of medical doctors who think and believe the same way that I do on the question of how do you beat and reverse diabetes. Well, let's get back to me. When I first began to realize I was going to have to cut the carbohydrates significantly in my diet, I was far more aware of what I could not eat than what I could eat. Give up those potatoes, give up the rice, give up the breakfast cereal, give up the sugary desserts, give up, give up, give up. It was kind of depressing, but I was so desperate to find a solution to my runaway blood sugar, I was ready to try anything. Eventually, my glucose levels came down, and wonder of wonders, I found that there were far more foods that I could eat than I originally supposed. And that's what this particular video is all about. It's not about what you cannot eat. You've heard that lots of times. It is about what you can safely eat without the fear of spiking glucose levels through the roof. Or at least it works that way in my life. I've placed my go-to foods and meals into 5 different categories. These are the foods that have enable me to live with an A1c of around 5.0 for a number of years now. Sometimes I'm a little above, sometimes a bit below 5.0, but I'm usually right around that mark, and I'm well satisfied with that. So without further ado, let's get to the 5 categories that keep my glucose levels humming along. If not normally, well, at least they're pretty close to normal, especially for an old guy like me. And based on what I've learned, there are a whole lot of men and women who have never been diagnosed with diabetes, and yet they have a higher A1c than I do. Group number 1, the meat and eggs group. Now, this is the only group the carnivore dieters will ever touch, but for me, it's just one of several groups of foods that I eat. Meat and eggs do almost nothing to raise glucose levels, and you may even find that your glucose will be lower after a meat and eggs meal than it was before you started the meal. I know the theory goes that protein can affect glucose a bit and make it rise a bit, and I suppose that's true, but with all the thousands of post-meal glucose tests that I've done on myself, I've never seen any evidence of that. What meats can you eat? Well, any and every meat. Beef, pork, fish, grasshopper, kangaroo, squirrel, quail, octopus. By its very definition and its nature, meat is carb-less, carb-free, carb-lacking. As long as it doesn't have a bread coating and as long as you don't smother it with a sugary barbecue sauce, meat is going to be your friend and do almost nothing to your glucose. It is primarily carbohydrates that raise blood sugar. A few carbs will raise your blood sugar a little. A moderate amount of carbs will raise it more, and a meal with lots of carbs will spike your glucose tremendously. You can protest all day long that we're all different, and, well, that is true, but this one fact never varies. It is an inviolate law of nature, and it's just as true as the law of gravity. Now, we all have a specific glucose baseline, and that is the default blood sugar level that we fall back to after we haven't eaten for 4 or 5 hours or more. And this is typically close to what your glucose meter is going to read when you test your blood sugar immediately upon waking. We call it the fasting blood sugar. If this number is in the 80s, well, you're doing real well. If it's in the 90s, not bad at all. Over 100, a bit concerning. In the 110s, problematic. And if your blood sugar runs over 125 each morning before you eat, well, most American doctors are going to tell you you are diabetic. The good news is that the baseline level of your glucose, the place where your blood sugar falls after you don't eat for 5 or 6 hours, it's not static. It can get better or it can get worse. It will move. Now, most diabetics are on such a vicious merry-go-round of ever-increasing blood sugar, constantly increasing fasting glucose, and constantly increasing A1cs that many doctors have concluded that diabetes only travels one direction. It'll always get worse. But in the last generation or so, with the advent of the low-carb diets that have been promoted, we have found that your baseline glucose, well, it might get worse if you constantly feed it carbs, but it can get better if you replace most of those carbs with proteins and fats. It's just that simple. And this is why meat and eggs are such a powerful addition to the diabetic diet. The more meat and eggs you eat, the less carbs are going to fit on your plate and in your stomach. And when you reduce your carbs by switching away from those carbs and turning toward proteins and fats, which is all that meat contains, blood sugar is going to repent. It'll turn away from its ever-increasing condition, and it will head back toward normalcy. And it's not just the numbers on your meter that get better. This is not just a numbers game. Diabetic complications begin to recede. Neuropathy eases. Your kidneys begin to function better. Organs lose their fat and sluggishness. Fatigue leaves. Eyes improve. And you lose that panicky feeling that your entire body could fall and collapse at any moment. A second food group that I depend on is made up of salads and low-carb vegetables. I'm convinced that these foods are nutritionally important. And what's more, my glucose meter has told me and assured me over and over again that these foods, salads and low-carb vegetables, have a very minimal effect on blood sugar. Yeah, they do have some carbs, but they don't have a lot of carbs, and the carbs they do have are very slow-acting, slow-dissolving carbs. Salads and low-carb vegetables add variety to your diet, and they make you feel less of a dietary martyr. Your pancreas was made to process carbs. That's why it can do it. And not just for a couple of decades, but for 80, 90, or 100 years. You don't have to be afraid of carbs when they come in a light to moderate and slow-acting form like you would get in green leafy vegetables and salads. It's the fast-acting carbs and the foods that contain lots of them that present the biggest danger to diabetics and everybody else. A salad is a perfect companion to a helping of meat. Make sure you use a low-carb dressing, though, and avoid putting chips or croutons in the salad, and you should have no problems. A third food group that makes up a major part of my diet is high-fat dairy. Specifically, I'm talking about heavy cream, butter, and cheese. Most mornings, my first meal, so-called, air quotes, is a cup of coffee with about a tablespoon of butter and even more heavy cream. Milk is not so good. It has too much sugar and too many carbs in it, but a thick, heavy cream does not and is basically a freebie. And by making this my breakfast, I am tacking more hours to the night before where I do not tax my body with carbohydrate. This is just one more spike I'm avoiding by making this 1/3 of my daily meals. Cheese, which comes in the form of a block, has essentially no carbs at all. And it is so filling. This is the perfect side for a low-carb meal. When my main dish does not fill me up, I often reach for the cheese and a couple of slices, and I'm satisfied, and my blood sugar does not spike. Indeed, it cannot spike when I'm focusing on these low-carb foods like cheese and high-fat dairy and meat. Another group I depend on to keep my glucose levels stable would be the nuts. Nuts do not have a lot of carbs, and what carbs they do have, they dissolve very slowly. I can eat a handful of peanuts or pecans or walnuts or almonds, and they have very little effect on my glucose. Nuts may not be the perfect food for diabetics. They are fattening, they are not totally low carb, but they are infinitely superior to things like chips, rice, pretzels, and fruit pies. And one thing about nuts is that their carbohydrates, they're just so hard. They're locked into that hard nut, and they just don't dissolve quickly. They will take their time in your stomach and give your metabolic system an opportunity to deal with them, as opposed to potatoes and bread, which dissolve with lightning speed, and they overwhelm your poor, little, tired, overworked pancreas. Nuts are handled by your body on the installment program. Bread, potatoes, and rice demand payment right up front. Another group is fruit. I said that this was not going to be about what you should not eat, but rather about what you can safely eat. So I'm not going to tell you that fruits like bananas, pineapples, sweet apples, dates, and mangoes are a nightmare for your blood sugar. I won't say that. But I will tell you that two fruits that I do trust are strawberries and avocados. Avocados, although they do possess carbs, they're not sweet, and they're loaded with fiber, and my body handles them very well. And strawberries are fantastic. I was so elated early in my diabetic journey when I learned that an average-sized strawberry had exactly 1 gram of carbs. I can take 3 or 4 strawberries, mash them up, mix in maybe a little bit of water, put them on a mug cake, and spray it with some keto whipped cream, and I have an amazing dessert. There are a few other fruits that might work for you, but my two favorites are the strawberries and avocados. The final group I want to talk with you about is not exactly a food group, but it is a group that most diabetics struggle with. And what I'm talking about would be the bread group. Now, I'm not trying to encourage people to eat bread. Bread is off limits. That is normal bread. White bread, wheat bread, 100% whole wheat bread, Ezekiel bread, sourdough bread, and so forth. All of those breads are going to hurt you. But there are some bread substitutes and bread lookalikes and bread taste-alikes that look like bread, even come close to tasting like bread, and yet they're not bread, at least not what most people think about as bread. I would call them bread substitutes, and while they're not exactly necessary, they make the low-carb lifestyle so much easier and more attractive. Actually, the first bread substitute that I'm going to mention is, in my mind, just as tasty as most real breads and better than some. I'm talking about the chaffle. Mix a half cup of shredded cheese with 1 egg and throw in a little baking powder. Cook it like a waffle or a pancake, and lo and behold, you have a beautiful bread-like food that you can use as a bun on hamburgers and sandwiches, or you can eat with sugar-free syrup like a pancake, or you can put some cream cheese on it and eat it like a bagel. It is filling, it tastes great, and your blood sugar will go nowhere. I found chaffles relatively late in the game, and I only can regret that I didn't discover them at the beginning of my low-carb journey. What a powerful role they play. There are plenty of other keto breads and low-carb breads that you can make, including keto tortillas. You can use these tortillas to make tacos, and you can use them as a base for a thin crust pizza. Mug cakes are another substitute bread. They are a revolutionary low-carb food, and they're so fast to make. Mix a large tablespoon of almond flour with a large tablespoon of coconut flour, and mix in a blended egg and some baking powder. Put a little non-sugar sweetener in the mix, microwave it for about 90 seconds, and voila, you have the perfect little mug cake to put your strawberries on, or to smother it with some sugar-free syrup and pecans. Or you can add some cocoa powder to that mix and make yourself a little personal chocolate cake. Throw on some nuts, top it with whipped cream, and you will love it. There are, these days, keto breads you can buy at the grocery store, of course, at least for many of us. If you live in the U.S., you sure can. These seem to work for some, but not others, and some brands seem to work better than others. So be careful with store-bought keto breads and do some post-meal tests to see how they affect you. It's been my experience that homemade low-carb foods are much more trustworthy than the kind you buy at the store. So these are my 5 major food groups. Most of my normal meals come from these groups. And while it is true that we're all different, you'd have to be some kind of freak of nature to eat this kind of food and stay with it and avoid the high-carb food. You'd have to be some kind of freak of nature to be able to eat this food and just stay with a high glucose level. It's just not going to happen unless you're type 1, and even then it's going to help. But for a type 2, you should see victory. It may take 3 months or 6 months or maybe a little longer, but sooner or later, if you're a type 2 diabetic with a functioning pancreas, your glucose levels will begin to drop and drop significantly. And that, my friends, is a beautiful thing. If you've recently been diagnosed with diabetes and you've just discovered this channel, let me recommend that you go to our uploads page, which will give you access to every diabetic video we've posted since we began. As you work your way through all our videos, I believe you'll find the help you need. A link to our uploads page is in the description.